Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube channel. Today, I'm looking at some Dynasty buys. Make sure to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Let's go. So, first, Dynasty buy Diontae Johnson. Now, when I did the research for this video, I really didn't think that Diontae Johnson would be on my list, but I found that he's very undervalued. So let's look at his career. Starting in 2019, he had 59 catches, 680 yards, and 5 touchdowns on 92 targets. Not so great as a rookie. I mean, it's fine as a rookie, but obviously was not fantasy relevant that year. But he took the second-year leap as a member of the Steelers, and he became great in 2020. 88 catches, 923 yards, 7 touchdowns, 100 on 144 targets, 5.9 catches and 61.5 yards a game. 14.8 PPR points a game, 22nd among wide receivers. Very productive. Then, of course, 2021 was his big year. 107 catches, 1,161 yards, 8 touchdowns on 169 targets, which is crazy. 6.7 catches and 72.6 yards a game, 17.2 fantasy points per game, 9th among all wide receivers. Unfortunately, it all went down the hill from there after Ben Roethlisberger retired. 86 catches, 882 yards on 147 targets. So many targets, yet not much done with them. 5.1 catches and 51.9 yards a game. 10.6 fantasy points a game. 42nd among wide receivers. And then 2023 was not much better. Much fewer targets, but he actually scored 5 touchdowns. 55.2 yards a game. 3.9 catches. 40th in fantasy points per game. 11.6 PPR points per game. So, what changed for Johnson this offseason? He was traded to the Panthers. Now he is Bryce Young's clear wide receiver 1. And whatever Bryce Young is, I think Bryce Young is better than Kenny Pickett has been over the last 2 years. He's in position to earn lots of targets, and he turns 28 in July. And it's very clear from the Panthers training camp and all the news reports so far, there is no doubt that Johnson is the wide receiver 1. Not Xavier Legette, not Adam Thielen, but Diontae Johnson is the wide receiver 1, 100%. So on Keep Trade Cut, Diontae Johnson is wide receiver 48, which is interesting considering he's never finished that low since his rookie year. And he's in a new situation. And he shouldn't be valued that low. I mean, do we think Diontae Johnson forgot how to play football? I get not liking him, but I don't get how he ranks that low. I really don't get it. So this is a rare rank where I'm just miles off. It's not like I have him that high. I have him a wide receiver 36. I think he's going to be better than he was in 2023. So I think you're going to get some value out of him. And we do know that he's a good player. It's not in doubt. So I think you're going to get multiple years of usable fantasy production, and that cannot be worth wide receiver 48. So I've seen some trades where you can get Diontae Johnson for a mid-second, even a late second this year, or 25 second and 25 third, or, and this is probably the best, all of Marquise Brown, Amari Cooper, and Christian Watson, which I just don't understand, are ranked higher on Keep Trade Cut. I'd easily trade any of those players for Diontae Johnson, who for me is just much more of a sure thing than Hollywood Brown, who's almost the same age and has not had nearly the same level of target earning. Christian Watson, who is so inconsistent, and Amari Cooper, who's 2 years older. So I would easily trade any of those for Diontae Johnson. And to close out, again, his wide receiver 48 rank makes no sense. He's a proven target earner, which is hard to find at all, let alone in that range. And even if you're just taking the rest of Johnson's career with no resale value, it's still not a bad value at wide receiver 48. Adonai Mitchell is ahead of him, who's in a hopeless situation and fell down the draft board. Christian Kirk is almost 30 overall spots ahead of him. I have no idea why that is. So, yeah, definitely a buy or a draft target in startups for me, Diontae Johnson. Next up, Tua Tagovailoa. And I think I've been buying Tua the whole offseason, but people just don't like him for whatever reason. Let's look at why. As a rookie, he was okay. 64.1% completion, 11 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He was in and out of the lineup. 6.3 yards per attempt is not great. He did have 3 rushing touchdowns. Then in 2021, he improved, more accurate, a little bit better in yards per attempt, 6.8 yards per attempt, and a little bit better in fantasy points per game, but still not great. He didn't have a great first 2 years. He was okay. He wasn't horrible like some other players, but he wasn't good. But then in 2022, Mike McDaniel became the head coach, and Tua became a lot better. 64.8% completion, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 8.9 yards per attempt, which is really good. Didn't do anything on the ground. 23 carries, 70 yards, 18.4 fantasy points per game, 10th among quarterbacks. And then this past year, he kind of put it all together. He finally stayed healthy for a whole season, 69.3% completion, which is great. 29 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 8.3 yards per attempt. That's all solid. Still only 74 rushing yards. So that's a weakness. 16.7 fantasy points per game, 18th among quarterbacks, which isn't great, honestly. But the current situation, he still has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. They added Odell Beckham Jr. as depth. Whether you like it or not, he's about to get a large extension. He's in the last year of his rookie deal. And he played as a clear franchise quarterback over the last 2 seasons on a pretty large sample size. He's been good, if not spectacular, since Mike McDaniel became the head coach in 2022. But despite all of that, he's only quarterback 16 and 41st overall on Keep Trade Cut, which makes no sense in the quarterback landscape, either overall or among quarterbacks. I have him quarterback 13, 20th overall, just because he's a franchise quarterback. He should be ranked higher than 41st overall. You're going to get more value out of him in a super flex than that value says you should. What are some trade ideas to acquire Tagovailoa? You could get him for a 25 first. You get him for some of the rookies in this year's class. I guarantee you could send 106 or 107 in some spots for Tagovailoa. I have him ranked ahead of all the rookies except Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Jaden Daniels. And then this one, Tagovailoa is the same age as Jordan Love. Has a much bigger track record of actually being successful than Jordan Love. But Love is 24 overall spots higher on Keep Trade Cut. I don't get it. If you could get Tagovailoa plus anything for Jordan Love, I would absolutely do it. Probably get maybe even a early to mid-second with Tagovailoa for Love. So to close out, I don't get the hate on Tagovailoa at all, on Tua. Once he gets the massive extension, which he will get, like Jared Goff got, people will accept that he's a clear franchise quarterback. In 2023, he led the NFL in passing yards. He was 5th in completion percentage, 2nd in yards per attempt, tied for 5th in passing touchdowns. He was also good in 2022. He's just 26 years old. He's a franchise quarterback. People might not like it, but he is. And I love drafting him in startups even more than acquiring him on the trade market because he's even cheaper in actual drafts than he is via trade. Now, if you like the content on the YouTube, you should sign up for the Patreon. You get my rankings, access to the Discord, and the ability to ask advanced questions for this YouTube channel. Tiers begin at just $6 a month. A lot of people say, I don't want to sign up because it's expensive. It's expensive. It's really not. $6 a month. I mean, nowadays, with what Starbucks costs, it's less than probably your favorite coffee order per month. I pride myself on being an independent voice on this channel. Nobody's telling me what to say. There's no editor editing this video. There's no corporation, no corporate saying, oh, you can't say this, you can't do that. But in a capitalist world like ours, that type of thing requires independent support to exist as a for-profit entity. So I need you guys. And it's been rough. I'm not going to lie. Hasn't been a lot of signups this offseason. So any help would be really awesome. And I promise I will help you win some fantasy leagues. There will be start, sit, redraft, all done in the Patreon Discord, not on Twitter. We're not going to do it on Twitter. We're going to do it in the Patreon Discord. So if you want that edge, that's the only place you're going to get it. I'm not giving it away for free anymore. So I hope that you sign up because otherwise I'm probably going to have to go look at a different career path. So yeah, any support would be much appreciated. Let's transition into my last Dynasty buy. Chris Godwin, kind of similar to Diontae Johnson. Gave him a full-time player in 2019, and he was great. 86 catches, 1,333 yards, 9 touchdowns, 121 targets, 19.7 fantasy points a game, 2nd among wide receivers. Actually finished wide receiver 2 in just 14 games. So he was awesome. And then it just kind of never really got back there. He was okay in 2020, 65 catches, 850 yards, 7 touchdowns, 84 targets, 5.4 catches and 70 yards a game, 15.9 fantasy points per game, 15th among wide receivers. Still pretty solid. Then in 2021, great again. 98 catches, 1,103 yards, 5 touchdowns, 127 targets, 7 catches, and 78.8 yards a game, which is great. 17.3 fantasy points per game, 7th among wide receivers. Even in 2022, still solid. 104 catches, 1,023 yards, but just 3 touchdowns, 142 targets, 14.9 fantasy points a game, 16th among wide receivers. And then last year, the catches went down to just 83. Similar receiving yards, but way down in per game production, 4.9 catches and 60.2 yards a game, and just 2 touchdowns somehow on 130 targets. Godwin's current situation still has Baker Mayfield as his quarterback alongside Mike Evans, and the Buccaneers added Jalen McMillan. In round 3, Godwin's just 28 years old and will be moving back into the slot this year, which I think is going to help his fantasy production. On KTC is wide receiver 45. I have him at wide receiver 37, so I think he's a value. Some recent trade ideas for Chris Godwin. I did really see this one. You could acquire Chris Godwin for Najee Harris. I would do that instantly. That was a real trade for my Patreon Discord. Similar to Diontae Johnson, you can buy maybe Chris Godwin for these players, same players, Marquise Brown, Amari Cooper, Christian Watson, who are all rated higher on Keep Trade Cut. I have Godwin ahead of all those players. You could also acquire him for a late 24-second. I really don't think people like Chris Godwin, so there's a lot of opportunities to buy in on Godwin at a cheap price. To close out on Chris Godwin, over the last 4 years, Mike Evans has 3 more targets in 6 more games, but 46 touchdowns to just 17 for Godwin. Godwin has 272 targets and 5 touchdowns over the last 2 years. That's not possible. That's not going to continue. So he hasn't lost it. He was great down the stretch. 6 catches and 83.6 yards over the final 6 games on a per game rate. And he's going to return to more slot usage. I really think this is a productive wide receiver that you can acquire for nothing. So I would happily do that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I have some Patreon questions. Only patrons get to ask these advanced questions, so let's jump straight into those. I know how much of an ageist you are in Dynasty. It's very true. But who are some old players, veterans, you don't mind acquiring at cost? We talked about 2 of them. Diontae Johnson and Chris Godwin probably top that list. In terms of even older, in Superflex, sometimes I don't hate the value on the old quarterbacks because quarterbacks are hard to find. So if you can get them cheap, I don't mind buying the rest of Kirk Cousins or Matthew Stafford's career in Superflex. I think they both have a few years left, and Kirk Cousins especially was still productive and might come at a discount because of the injury and the drafting of Michael Penix Jr. What's one player you want to sell before you see it? And who's one player you want to buy before you see it and it's too late? Selling, Javonte Williams. He has done nothing in the NFL to actually show he's a franchise running back. He was a great prospect, but he's never done it. He wasn't good in 2021. He split carries with Melvin Gordon. He was disappointing. In 2022, he still split carries with Gordon and then had a devastating injury. And then 2023, he looked putrid. 3.6 yards a carry. He was bad. So he's never done anything good in his 3 years. If he is not good in 2024 and then hits the free agent market in 2025, he's not going to get a contract to be a starter, and he's going to lose most of the rest of his dynasty value. So he is definitely the top of the list if I don't want to see it. As for buying that I don't want to see it, Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think you'll know immediately. Week 1, his usage will have either changed and he'll be getting an 85, 90% snap share, or it won't have. But if he hits, people love JSN as a prospect and his value will soar. So he's the player I would be buying before I see it. Lastly, biggest holds for me this offseason, JSN, Diontae Johnson, Chris Godwin are all on that list if I already have them. Some other candidates, T. Higgins, what can you do with him? He's a talented player. He's just 25 years old, but nobody wants to buy him. So because of all the problems, if you have him, just hold him. And then the last, Kenneth Walker. You can't get the appropriate value for Walker. Nobody is buying him, but he's too valuable to just sell for nothing. So for those reasons, he's a hold. Now, if you liked the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops on the channel. I'm trying to do a video every other day, so that notifications bell is the best way to find out about all that. Of course, as I said earlier, if you want my best Dynasty Fantasy Football advice, redraft, starts it, everything, it's available on the Patreon, and every sign up really, really helps support me. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all